Richard Boone, The Tragedy of Endless Effort and Ultimate Failure. The man they loved to hate. In January of 1961, TV Guide dedicated 3 consecutive issues to a single television star. Not to celebrate him, not to honor his success. The headline of that series read, "Few other stars are so earnestly, piously, and vehemently hated." Earnestly, piously, vehemently. 3 words that don't belong in the same sentence as a man who was, at that exact moment, the 3rd highest-rated performer in all of American television, a man whose show was making CBS millions of dollars every single season. The hatred didn't come from critics. It didn't come from the audience. It came from the directors who worked with him, the writers who handed him scripts, the producers who signed his paychecks. The very people who were getting rich because of him were the people who despised him most. And here is the question that no documentary, no biography, no tribute reel has ever answered clearly. Why would the people profiting most from a man's success hate him with that particular intensity? The answer doesn't live in his drink. It doesn't live in his difficult reputation, the stories about him throwing people off his set, the TV Guide profiles that made him sound like a force of nature with a grudge. The answer lives in something far more uncomfortable than any of that. It lives in the fact that Richard Boone could see exactly what television was, what it was doing to American culture, what it was doing to the people making it, and what it was doing to him personally. And unlike almost everyone else in that building, he could not pretend otherwise. He was not destroyed by Hollywood. He was not a naive artist swallowed by the machine. He was a man who walked into the machine with his eyes completely open, with a plan he believed was airtight, with a patience built from 6 years in the Pacific, and a conviction that his intelligence would be enough to outmaneuver every obstacle placed in front of him. He was wrong, but not in the way you might expect. Before there was Paladin, there was a torpedo gunner who wanted to paint. Richard Boone did not arrive at acting the way most people do. He did not grow up dreaming of the stage. He did not spend his teenage years in community theater or study film theory in college. He arrived at acting sideways, through war, through a writing experiment that failed, through a decision made on the GI Bill that he almost immediately regretted, and then didn't. He was born in Los Angeles in 1917. His father was a corporate lawyer. His mother was the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants with a love of music. The family had a lineage that Boone wore lightly. They descended not from Daniel Boone himself, but from Daniel's brother Squire, making Richard a collateral heir to America's most mythologized frontiersman and a 6th cousin of singer Pat Boone, a fact he found more amusing than meaningful. He enrolled at Stanford in 1934, switched from pre-law to drama, boxed competitively, joined a fraternity, and staged an elaborate prank involving a lifelike dummy and the car of former First Lady Lou Henry Hoover. The university decided, with considerable diplomacy, that his particular talents were being wasted in a classroom setting. He drifted, oil rigger, bartender, painter. He studied at the Los Angeles Art Students League and the Chouinard Art Institute with genuine intention, not dabbling, but pursuing painting as a vocation. He was, by his own account, looking for the thing he was supposed to spend his life doing. Then came the war. Boone enlisted in the Navy in May of 1942. He served as a rear gunner on TBF Avenger torpedo bombers in the Pacific Theater, flying combat missions from 3 aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise, the USS Intrepid, and the USS Hancock. He participated in operations across the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, the attack on Truk, and strikes against Okinawa and mainland Japan. He earned 3 air medals. He was honorably discharged in December of 1945 as a petty officer. He almost never talked about what he saw in those years. His generation rarely did. What he did during those years was right. He couldn't carry an easel on a torpedo plane, so he wrote short stories instead, imitating Hemingway and Dos Passos. He realized, reading them back, that his dialogue was weak. So when the GI Bill offered returning soldiers access to education, Boone made a specific and calculated decision. He enrolled at the neighborhood playhouse in New York, not to become an actor, but to study how real actors handled spoken language. He wanted to learn how dialogue worked from the inside. What happened instead was that he discovered he could act, and that it frightened him how good he was at it. He studied under Sanford Meisner, who believed that acting was not about performing emotion, but about responding truthfully in imaginary circumstances. He trained in movement and physical discipline under Martha Graham. He then became one of the founding members of Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio, where his classmates included Marlon Brando, Carl Malden, Eva Marie Saint, and Julie Harris. None of them were famous yet. All of them would become legends. By 1947, Boone was on Broadway, not as a featured player, but serving as understudy to John Gielgud himself in a production of Medea, performing 214 nights alongside Judith Anderson. The following year, he appeared in Macbeth alongside Sir Michael Redgrave. He was working at the absolute summit of the English-speaking theatrical world. For Richard Boone, this was not a stepping stone. This was the destination. This was where he was supposed to spend his career. Marlon Brando left the Actors Studio and went to film. He became one of the most celebrated actors in the history of cinema. 3 Oscars, a permanent, undisputed place in the American cultural imagination. Richard Boone, from the same class, with the same training, with a physical presence that contemporaries described as more instinctively dangerous than Brando's in certain rooms. Richard Boone ended up on CBS on Saturday nights. The distance between those two outcomes is not a story about talent. It is a story about a single afternoon in 1957, when a Western star named Randolph Scott read a script and shook his head. The Trap. A smart man builds for himself. Randolph Scott did not want the role of Paladin. The character was too complicated, too literary, too unlike the clean-lined Western heroes that Scott had spent his career embodying. He passed the script to the man sitting next to him on a film set. That man was Richard Boone. The character was this: a West Point graduate and Civil War veteran working as a hired gun post-war West, living in a luxury suite at San Francisco's Hotel Carlton, quoting Keats and Shelley between assignments, dining in formal white, switching to all black when the job required violence. His calling card featured a silver chess knight, because the knight, as Boone explained it, is the only piece on the board that moves in ways no one can predict, that jumps over every obstacle, that always arrives from the direction you didn't expect. CBS hesitated. Boone had spent 2 years playing a compassionate physician on the medical drama Medic. Putting him in a gunslinger's hat seemed like a category error. A 5-minute test film changed every executive's opinion. Boone signed a 5-year contract, and from the very first week, he understood exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it. In 1960, while Have Gun Will Travel was sitting at number 3 in the national Nielsen ratings, while it was making CBS more money per episode than most networks spent on entire seasons, Richard Boone sat down with a reporter and said, without hedging, that most television was a waste of time, that the people creating it knew it was a waste of time, that they simply did not care. He said this while starring in the 3rd most watched show in America, without apology, without lowering his voice, because he was not building a television career. He was building a war chest. By 1960, Boone had achieved something the Museum of Broadcast Communications would later describe as unprecedented for a television performer: total creative control. Every script required his personal approval. Every director required his approval. Every supporting actor, every costume, every filming location, all of it passed through him. He directed 28 episodes himself. He deliberately chose remote filming locations to prevent network executives from flying out and inserting themselves into production decisions. He was running his set like a military commander who had read enough military history to know that the key to winning a campaign is controlling the terrain. And parallel to all of this, he was running a private acting workshop above the Brentwood Country Mart in Los Angeles. 35 students, a rotating ensemble of working actors who were learning, week by week, to work the way he worked. He was not just saving money. He was building a company. He structured the sale of his interest in the show as $50,000 a year for 20 years. Not a lump sum, an income. Because a man with an income doesn't panic. A man with a reliable income can take his time, can wait for exactly the right moment, can say no to anything that doesn't serve the larger purpose. He called it go-to-hell money, the kind of money that gives you the freedom to mean it when you say no. The plan was, by any serious measure, patient and intelligent and precise. It had taken 6 years to execute. It had cost him 6 years of playing a character he respected but did not love, in a medium he found genuinely limited, surrounded by an industry he considered philosophically bankrupt. There was only one thing the plan could not account for. The one variable that no amount of intelligence, no amount of capital, no amount of careful preparation can ever neutralize. Death, and the specific cruelty of its timing. 35 days. The Richard Boone Show was not a television program in any conventional sense. It was an argument, a sustained, expensive, carefully constructed argument that television, given the right structure and the right people, could function as legitimate theater. The format was unlike anything on American television. A permanent ensemble company of 9 actors rotating roles weekly. Robert Blake, Harry Morgan, Jeanette Nolan, Lloyd Bachner, Warren Stevens. 8 days of rehearsal per episode, at a time when most television productions allocated no rehearsal time at all. Scripts that addressed Vietnam, homosexuality, and the structural violence of American institutions. Subjects that every other production in the 1963 television landscape was carefully avoiding. NBC President Robert Kintner greenlit the show without requiring a pilot. That level of institutional faith in a single performer was, and largely remains, without precedent in American broadcast history. He signed because he believed in Boone, because he believed the argument Boone was making. And for story editor, the person who would serve as the intellectual and moral foundation of the entire enterprise, Boone chose Clifford Odets. Odets was not merely a respected playwright. He was the voice of the American stage in the 20th century, author of Waiting for Lefty, Awake and Sing, Golden Boy, plays that made audiences feel that theater was not entertainment, but testimony, not something you watched from a comfortable distance, but something that happened directly to you. Odets had spent 30 years insisting that art had an obligation to tell the truth about the lives of ordinary people. He was, in every meaningful sense, the person Boone had been preparing to work with since he left the Navy. Odets did not accept the position because of the salary. He accepted it because he believed Richard Boone was attempting something that American television had never attempted and might never attempt again. The show was scheduled to premiere on September 24, 1963. Clifford Odets died on August 18, 1963. He had completed 2 scripts. 35 days before the premiere, the person who was supposed to be the conscience of the entire project was gone. There are plans built around systems. When a system loses a component, you find a replacement component, and the system continues. But there are plans built around people, around the specific, irreplaceable presence of a specific human being whose understanding of what you are trying to do cannot be transferred or approximated or substituted. When that person disappears, the plan doesn't break, it continues running. But the thing that was supposed to animate it from the inside is no longer there. Boone replaced Odets with a young writer named William D. Gordon. The decision was not reckless. Gordon had genuine talent, but he was working without the 30 years of experience, without the moral authority, without the weight that Odets would have brought to every editorial decision. The show went on. It had to. Boone had come too far, had paid too much across too many years to stop 35 days from the moment he had been building toward. But something essential had shifted. Something that would not be visible in the premiere episode, or the second, or the third. Something that would only become clear much later, in retrospect. The way structural damage in a building only reveals itself when the pressure finally exceeds what the remaining supports can hold. The newspaper on the table. You need to understand what America looked like in the autumn and winter of 1963. On November 22nd, the president was shot in Dallas. By the time November became December and December became January, the country was living inside a grief that had no obvious outlet and no clear timeline for resolution. People wanted their routines back. They wanted their Tuesday nights and their Saturday evenings to feel the way they had felt before. Predictable, safe, uncomplicated. They wanted to sit in front of a television and not be asked to think about the ethics of violence or the contradictions of American democracy or anything that required them to sit with discomfort for an hour. They wanted Petticoat Junction. Petticoat Junction was a CBS comedy about a family running a small hotel in a rural town where nothing particularly difficult ever happened. It offered warmth and simplicity, and the reassurance that somewhere in America, life was still easy. It was exactly what 50 million people needed in the winter of 1963, and they watched it in exactly those numbers. The Richard Boone Show pulled a 23.4 rating share in a typical week. Petticoat Junction pulled 46.0. Those numbers were not a verdict on quality. The Golden Globe Committee understood quality. They gave The Richard Boone Show the award for Best Drama Series. The Emmy Committee understood quality. They nominated it 5 times, including Best Actor for Boone. But the country was grieving, and grief does not navigate toward the most artistically ambitious option available. Grief moves toward whatever hurts the least. NBC's executives understood this in the specific clinical way that people understand things when the primary variable they track is revenue. The arithmetic was not recoverable. No scheduling adjustment, no promotional campaign, no creative pivot was going to close a gap of 23 points in a single season. In January of 1964, NBC made its decision. They did not call Boone into an office. They did not send a representative to the set. They did not arrange a phone call or a meeting or any form of direct human communication with the man whose name was on the show. They leaked the cancellation to the Hollywood trade papers. Boone learned his show had been canceled by reading it in a newspaper. His cast, the ensemble he had spent years assembling, the actors who had turned down other work to be part of something they believed in, they learned the same way. A paragraph in a trade publication, impersonal, efficient, delivered by the same mechanism used to announce a schedule change or a network merger. Boone immediately barred NBC Vice President Mort Werner from the set. He told reporters that the way the network had chosen to communicate this decision revealed everything that needed to be known about what NBC actually was. He said that as long as the creative decisions in American television remained in the hands of people who had come from the advertising business, rather than from any engagement with art or craft or the serious study of human experience, people with genuine creative ambitions would never have a real chance. Not a fair chance. Not any chance at all. He called network executives dancing jellyfish. No spine, no direction of their own, moving wherever the current pushed them, calling it strategy. The show received a Golden Globe and 5 Emmy nominations after it was canceled. Not one person from NBC called to acknowledge either. What if Boone was wrong about Paladin? Here is a question Richard Boone never asked himself. He was too busy resenting the answer to ask the question. If Paladin was what Boone believed it was, a commercial compromise, a 6-year transaction conducted with clear eyes and clear purpose, then why did it consistently attract the people it attracted? Gene Roddenberry wrote 24 episodes of Have Gun, Will Travel before he created Star Trek. The character he eventually built in Captain Kirk, educated, principled, capable of violence but genuinely reluctant to employ it, guided by a personal code of ethics that occasionally put him in direct conflict with the institutional authority above him. That character shares specific DNA with Paladin in ways too deliberate to be coincidental. Boone never knew this connection. Roddenberry was never public about that particular lineage, but it is there, in the structure of the episodes, in the way both characters carry their intelligence as the primary weapon and treat their firearms as a last resort. Bruce Geller wrote scripts for Have Gun before creating Mission Impossible. Sam Peckinpah contributed an episode before redefining the entire Western film genre. Bernard Herrmann composed the iconic 4-note opening theme before scoring Psycho and Vertigo for Alfred Hitchcock. Harry Julian Fink wrote multiple episodes before scripting Dirty Harry. These were not journeyman television writers filling time slots. These were people who would go on to reshape American popular culture across the following 3 decades, and they chose to begin that work inside the creative framework that Boone had constructed and controlled. The show that Boone treated as a means to an end was, for the people learning inside it, an education, a training ground, a place where a particular set of ideas about storytelling and character and moral ambiguity was being developed and refined, week after week, in front of an audience of 30 million people. And here is the harder question, the one that requires sitting with genuine discomfort. What if Paladin was not the compromise Boone endured on his way to his real work? What if Paladin was the real work, disguised in a format he could not allow himself to respect, distributed by a network he could not allow himself to admire, reaching an audience he had not figured out how to value? What if the thing he spent 6 years treating as a transaction was the actual contribution, and the thing he spent 6 years preparing, the repertory theater, the ensemble company, the elevated dramatic vision, was the dream that the real work was funding? The universe, if it has any consistent quality, has a very dry sense of humor. It preserved exactly the thing Richard Boone did not want to be remembered for, and it allowed the thing he most wanted to leave behind, the Richard Boone Show, the argument, the vision, to survive only in academic papers and the footnotes of television history books. Hawaii, and the roles a man takes when he is done arguing. After the cancellation, Boone left Los Angeles. He and his family moved to Honolulu in 1964, and the decision has been described ever since as a retreat, as the withdrawal of a man who had been broken by the industry he'd fought. That description is too simple, and it is not quite accurate. Boone was not retreating. He was still moving. He persuaded Leonard Freeman to shoot Hawaii Five-0 entirely on location on the islands, rather than splitting production between Hawaii and California. He developed a pilot called Kona Coast, with every intention of turning it into a series based in Hawaii. He genuinely believed that the islands could become an alternative center of production, somewhere far enough from network interference to allow for a different kind of work. CBS passed on Kona Coast. They chose Hawaii Five-0. Boone's plan for a Hawaiian production base ended there. What followed was a decade of films, Most of them good, some of them genuinely excellent. None of them what he had wanted to be making. In 1967, he appeared opposite Paul Newman in Ombre, playing a villain whose cold intelligence gives the film much of its moral weight. The critic Pauline Kael wrote that Boone was the most compelling presence in the movie, which was saying something, given that the film starred Paul Newman at the height of his powers. Boone plays the scene opposite Newman as if Newman is the one who should be nervous. He was right. In 1971, Big Jake with John Wayne. In 1977, he provided the voice of Smaug the Dragon in the Rankin/Bass animated adaptation of The Hobbit, a performance that required nothing but his voice and produced something genuinely unsettling in its intelligence and restraint. Just a voice, no costume, no character to inhabit beyond the sound he could make with his own instrument. It might be the purest thing he ever put on record. And in 1976, God's Gun, a film he described with the precision of a man who has given up caring what anyone thinks, as the worst picture ever made, produced by an Israeli who could not communicate with the Italian director, who was deaf in both ears. Boone walked off the set before recording his dialogue. The studio hired another actor to dub his voice in post-production. He collected his fee and did not look back. He taught acting at Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida, from 1972 to 1973. He told his students to leave the profession if they possibly could, to find another life, to come back to acting only if they had exhausted every other option and discovered, with genuine reluctance, that they could not survive without it. He was not being cruel. He was being honest about what the profession had cost him and what it would cost them. One letter, written by hand. St. Augustine, 1980. Richard Boone was 63 years old. A dentist, not a doctor, a dentist, had discovered a tumor in his throat. He was a man who had smoked between 60 and 100 a day for most of his adult life. The diagnosis was not a surprise in any meaningful sense. He declined aggressive treatment. During the months that followed, as the people who knew him made their various forms of peace and distance and acknowledgement, Harry Morgan wrote him a letter. Morgan was the closest collaborator of Boone's professional life, the actor who had worked alongside him most consistently, who had known him inside the pressures of production in ways that friends outside the industry simply cannot. He wrote Boone a note by hand. In it, he said that he missed him, that he wished they could work together again and have some laughs, that in his whole life, the years working with Boone had been the most satisfying, the most genuinely fulfilling, the most fun in the deepest sense of the word. Not the Golden Globe, not the Emmy nominations, not the critical recognition that had validated what they had tried to build together. The work. The ordinary days on set. Two people trying to do something with enough care that it would be worth the time of the people watching. Richard Boone died on January 10, 1981, at his home in St. Augustine, Florida. His ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Hawaii. The UPI obituary noted that he had appeared in more than 500 television programs, 65 films, and 11 stage plays. It noted that he was best known as Paladin, and then it included one sentence that felt like the truest thing written about him that day. He was proudest of the Richard Boone Show, the show that lasted one season, the show that lost to Petticoat Junction. The show that exists today almost entirely in the institutional memory of television scholars and the occasional retrospective. That was the thing he was most proud of, not the 6 years in the top 3 ratings, not the cultural impact of a character that influenced the men who would create Star Trek and Mission Impossible. The thing he was most proud of was the one he fought hardest for and lost most completely. There is something important in that, though it takes a moment to find it. A man who has spent 6 years in a role he used as a financial instrument, who has accumulated enough money to say no to anything, who has built an ensemble and recruited a genius and designed a format that had never existed before, and who then loses the whole thing 35 days before it begins because the person he built it around died of cancer. That man does not emerge with a simple lesson. He does not emerge with a clear moral or a clean narrative. He emerges with the particular pride of someone who fought for the right thing with everything he had and still lost, which is a different kind of pride than winning, and, for some people, a more durable one. The knight moves in all directions, but the board has rules. Before we finish, there are a few things that deserve to be placed next to each other without comment. Marlon Brando, from the same actor's studio class as Richard Boone, with the same teacher, became one of the most celebrated actors in the history of cinema. 3 Academy Awards, a name that will outlast the medium. Gene Roddenberry wrote 24 scripts for Richard Boone's show, learned what he learned in those rooms, and went on to create a franchise that is still running today, more than 60 years later. Boone never knew what he had given Roddenberry. Roddenberry never said publicly what Boone had given him. Victor DaCosta was a construction worker from Cranston, Rhode Island, who performed at rodeos dressed in black as a character he called Paladin, with a calling card that read, "Have gun, will travel. Wire Paladin, N Court Street, Cranston, RI," and distributed that card with a chess knight printed on it, years before CBS produced the show. He sued Viacom in the 1980s. A jury awarded him $3.5 million in 1991. The verdict was overturned on appeal. Victor DaCosta died in 1993. He never received a dollar. Almost no one knows his name. And The Richard Boone Show, the Golden Globe winner, the 5-time Emmy nominee, the show that television scholars would later describe as one of the most significant missed turns in the history of the medium, ran for 1 season and was canceled in a trade paper paragraph. Paladin is still here. The chess knight on the holster, the calling card, the man in black who quoted Keats in San Francisco and rode out into the desert when the work required it. 60 years later, in ways neither Boone nor anyone at CBS fully anticipated, Paladin is still the thing people remember. Richard Boone spent 6 years treating that character as a transaction, as the price he paid for the freedom to do something that actually mattered. He was wrong about what mattered, and he was wrong about what would last, and he never allowed himself to discover it. But maybe that is not the saddest part of the story. The saddest part is the letter. One letter, written by hand, by a friend who missed him, in which the only thing that turned out to matter, after 6 years of Paladin, after the Golden Globe, after the NBC cancellation, after Hawaii and Florida and God's Gun and Ombre and all the rest of it, was the work itself, the ordinary days, the attempt. Harry Morgan wrote, "In my whole life, the times working with you were the most satisfying and the best and the most fun in the deepest sense. Not the awards, not the ratings, not the argument they won with the critics or the argument they lost to Petticoat Junction. The days, the work, the company of a man who cared too much about what they were making to ever pretend otherwise, even when pretending would have been easier and more comfortable and considerably more lucrative." Richard Boone was proudest of the thing he built and lost. He was remembered for the thing he built and kept, and the only honest testimony to what any of it was worth came from one person in one letter, written by hand somewhere in the last months of his life. The knight moves in 8 directions, over every obstacle, always unexpected. Richard Boone moved that way his entire career. He just never quite found the square where everything resolved. Maybe that's the only kind of story worth telling, the ones where the knight is still moving when the game ends.